stories. So, Fall of the House of Usher. Let's talk about that one first, just because I read it last. That's the only reason. Right? It's fresher in my mind. Right. So, this is one of his famous, really famous stories. It's a lot different than most of the stories because, we talked the other day about the Imp of the Perverse and the Black Cat, right? Poe typically doesn't work with setting too much, right? Poe typically doesn't involve setting that much. We definitely got that from those stories, right? The setting wasn't that important in the Black Cat. I mean, it just wasn't. I mean, he had his house, maybe his creepy basement where he hid his wife at the end, right? But other than that, that was it. Imp of the Perverse was this kind of philosophical abstraction. Right? Even Ligeia, well, Ligeia, we get some setting in it too, but it may be not as prominent as Fall of the House of Usher. So the setting is a key ingredient in this story, and it's kind of hard to talk about what's going on without talking about the setting. But before we dive too knee deep into it, I just want to get your three's thoughts. What did you think about the story, Fall of the House of Usher? Or even before, how about this? One of you sum up the plot for me, and then we'll dive into what you thought. So, Ryan, how about you? Tell me what happened, what the hell happened in the story.
I am trying to think. It's been a while since I read the book, so I'm trying to remember. Need a hot second.
It's a creepy house, right? We could start there. It's a creepy house.
He tries to explain the area around the house with the decayed trees and a few white trunks with complete and utter depression around surrounding area. Kind of makes me think there's like a foggy mist around the mansion.
Right? Yeah, there definitely is a foggy mist around the mansion for sure, right? So this kind of very depressing. It feels like,
A sense of dread
right?
going into it.
Yeah, very much a sense of dread, right? There's this feeling in the air of this is a suppressing feeling in the air, right? That just suffocates you. Right, as soon as you get near it, it just kind of suffocates you. You can't breathe almost because the air is so thick. Right? It's almost like they're in a swamp or something, right? Just the air is that thick, right?
Ron, do you mind if I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead.
Uh, the plot, what I got from it, Poe, one of his old, very close friends, I believe it was from school maybe, sent him a letter and asked him to come and I think just stay with him for a little bit at his place because he was going through some mental and physical illnesses. And, Poe gets there and sees the atmosphere. And one thing I thought was interesting is he talks about maybe if it was rearranged in a certain way, it wouldn't have that same, like, really just dreadful, dark atmosphere to it. And he gets there and he sees that his friend is almost in utter madness. And throughout his stay, it feels like Poe himself almost falls into that same kind of madness. And the thing that really pushes his friend over, or the last Usher over the edge, is his sister's death. And you get to the climax where they're reading from that book, and there's a huge storm, and they hear everything, and then, oh wait, we didn't really entomb a dead person. His sister was still alive, and he leaves, and the whole place falls to the ground.
Right. Very, very melodramatic close to the end, isn't it? The big thunderstorm, right? The place falls to the ground, right? it's very dramatic at the end, to say the least.
One thing that I thought was really interesting, I've not read a lot of Poe, but just from the few that we've read in this class so far, usually whenever Poe's writing about madness, the narrator is the one that's going mad. And in this case, the narrator was observing someone else falling into that. And I thought it was just a very different perspective.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Right, the narrator of this story seems pretty stable, right, in comparison to, even compared to Ligeia today. He seems very stable. You know, he doesn't seem like he's, does he? I think opium is mentioned in Usher at some point, um, but it might be. I think it might have been used to describe Roderick. Usher was on it, and not him in this case. Right. So, but nonetheless, would you argue that the narrator slowly loses it as the story goes along? Would you think? You think so?
Yeah, I think so. What do y'all think?
Lauren, you want to chime in here?
Definitely would go mad if I help somebody entomb somebody and then find out that they're actually alive.
that would mess anybody up, right?
I'd say going near the end, just about everybody in the story, including the narrator, was going to near madness. Especially since Poe was kind of mad himself.
Right.
I don't know about you all, but I felt with that, we can kind of gather that Poe faced a lot of mental disorders and some drug addiction and things like that. I think that his use of the narrator and the perspective in this can really kind of be stemmed from what the people around him would have experienced. And kind of anyone that is close to something like that and to someone who's going through that, they get pulled into the madness as well. They can't be immune to it completely.
Right. Yeah, so this shows the victims of someone going through some type of mental illness or madness, right? Just as much as the person himself, right? So good and good. Um, so let's come up with some themes here, right? Let's come up with some main ideas. What's the story about at its core? Right, that's something that we should probably. I think if we come up with this, I think talking about these other things like the setting, the narrator, all this stuff will help us. So, you guys, Ryan and Nicole summed up the plot as far as what happens in the story. But at its core, what's this story about? What are these main themes? So we have this. The story is called "Fall of House of Usher." Right. The story is about this ancient, wealthy family. Right. This aristocratic type of family. Just as short little lecture about that. This is something that you guys might not be familiar with as Americans, right? Just because this type of thing isn't that important to Americans, but it is to the British, right? This idea of these old families, right, passing down the line to the next heir of these families. These families go back hundreds and hundreds of years, right? Ancestry, and it's extremely important to to Europeans in general, not just the British, but to Europeans. Americans, not so much. Right? Maybe we can talk about why. But it's this ancient family. They have this very big estate, right? But as we see, this estate is in a sense of decay and ruin, right? There's so we learn that Roderick and Madeline are the last of the line of the House of Usher. Right, once their bloodline is, if neither one of them produce a child, that bloodline is gone. Right, so no pressure, right, to have kids. Right, but so yeah, that's the backdrop as far as class goes, we don't know what our narrator's class is. It doesn't really say. Um, he's just a friend of Roderick's from school, from college or something, right? That's pretty much what our narrator is. So as far as so now we're going to get into, I don't know if you guys picked up on the subtext or not, but now we're going to get into some really creepy stuff regarding this theme. Um, lots of times these old families, to preserve themselves, there was incest, right? There was inbreeding and things like that, right? To keep the line going down, especially when it comes to royalty, right? Lots of times that this would happen. So you guys can kind of see where I'm going with this. Do you think that this is happening in the story? You guys think that something's going on with Roderick and his sister?
I got the vibe.
Did you?
I did.
How so?
I can't remember what exactly was said, but when, like, the first glimpse that the narrator got of the sister, I don't know how it was worded, but there was something said about how close him and his sister were. And then at the end, he discloses they were twins. And I
They
get
look
like,
alike.
oh, and I'm like, oh, Game of Thrones, twins, haha. I don't know. I just kind of gathered that from that little bit.
Right. What about the other two of you? Did you pick up on this, or was this something that you didn't think about before I said it?
Honestly, it never even crossed my mind that there was something special going on around there between the sister and the usher, who I'm trying to remember the name of and have been like frantically scrolling through it. I can't remember his name.
Madeline and Roderick. Those are the two ushers.
Okay. I was eluding me for so long. I couldn't remember the names.
Yeah, oftentimes part of what is scary about a gothic story is what's not said, right? Things that might be motivating these characters, things, what causes these nervous afflictions that these characters have, right? Maybe not, right? Maybe that isn't going on, but it does seem like it, right? I would, to say the least. That perhaps is something. Because Roderick Usher feels a big sense of guilt. We have to ask ourselves too: was she really standing up out of her grave at the end? Right? Was she really, or did both of these guys just lose it by the end of the story? All right, that's something else we have to ask.
Was the general sense of just the mansion itself driving people mad? I would say they were probably both having a psychotic vision of the woman standing back up or the sister standing back up. I don't think she actually stood back up. They may have saw that, but in my opinion, I think they just both went insane.
I agree. One thing that crossed my mind, I don't know if it crossed your all's, but the attention they paid to, like, the algae and stuff growing on the stones of it. I thought, what if there was mold? Because I know in some cases mold can cause some, like, mental things to go on. And I was thinking, what if literally the mold and whatnot from the castle is causing them to go mad? I don't think that they actually saw her either. I think that it was a figment of their imagination.
Right.
I also agree that it would be a figment of their imagination, especially after eating the black cat and he goes crazy and the cat sitting on the dead person's body.
Right. So a pattern here that perhaps by the end of the stories, these guys can't be trusted at all to tell the truth then. Right.
And one thing that I feel like we were talking about theme a little bit, me personally, I had it written down before you said it, but I feel like the theme for the overall story is decay of station, decay of relationships, just decay. That's what I get from it.
Right. Yeah, a decay of, like, Madeline's body literally decays, right? The decay of the house, the decay of Roderick's health, right? That's another bit of decay we have here. He can't even. He's so nervous that he can only listen to guitar, right? If he hears any other type of music, he starts losing his nerves, right? So we might ask ourselves, why is this decay so prominent, right? This is a curious story because Edgar Allan Poe was an American writer, right? Things like social class have never been as concerning to us as they are to the English, right? So it's curious that he sets it's curious that he sets this up when these old families and stuff like this just aren't as important to us as it is to them.
You know, I think that, I don't know if it really was his intention, but to me, it seemed as if it was putting everyone on level playing fields, because this might seem a little bit dark, but if you take a dead poor man and a dead rich man, they're going to rot just the same in the end.
Right.
And I think, to me, that's kind of what I got from it.
Right. Death is the great equalizer amongst social classes, right? You can't take your money with you when you're dead, right? So that could perhaps be a another sign here, right? Another theme, I meant. Yeah, let's take a look at a few passages. I think that'll help maybe anchor us a bit here. Let's see. You guys again have different page numbers than me because I'm reading out of one of my old textbooks.
Really quick question: your cat that's sitting like on your windowsill, what's its name?
Its name's Franny. Yeah. Yeah, that's my lone cat here, Franny. I did not name her. I inherited her from an ex of mine. Right, so she was getting ready to move, and she didn't want the cat anymore. I was like, well, I guess she's mine now. So here we are, several years later, a happy family over here. Do you ever see her in any of my other classes? Sometimes she just goes to and fro.
This is the first one I've noticed her in.
Right. Let's see if I can get a good look at her here. You see her? She's right here giving herself a bath.
Lounging away.
I've been kind of getting distracted by the cat just sitting in the background.
Now you know how I felt the day that I was talking and the puppy got in your face and
She jumps in my chair. I can't stop her. You refuse
So bad.
not let me pet her.
I feel bad for this class because around this time every day my bird always gets loud. I don't know what it is. It's just his time of the day.
Yeah, I always start laughing when he starts up. I'm like, that's why Nicole went quiet. Right? She's her bird's going nuts. So yeah, the first passage, you guys can look at it on your PDF. I want to look at it's the paragraph. It's a couple paragraphs into. It's the fourth paragraph in the story. It starts out, I've said that the sole effect of my somewhat childish experiment. That's where I'm at if you want to follow along. He says, I've said that the sole effect of my somewhat childish experiment of looking down within the tarn had been to deepen the first singular impression. There can be no doubt that the consciousness of the rapid increase of my superstition or why should I not so term it, served mainly to accelerate the increase itself. Such I have long known as the paradoxical law of all sentiments having terror as a basis. And it might have been for this reason only that, when I again uplifted my eyes to the house itself from its image in the pool, there grew in my mind a strange fancy, a fancy so ridiculous indeed that I but mentioned it to show the vivid force of my sensations which oppressed me. I had so worked upon my imagination as really to believe that around about the whole mansion and domain there hung an atmosphere peculiar to themselves in their immediate vicinity, an atmosphere which had no affinity with the air of heaven, but which had reeked up from the decayed trees and the gray walls and the silent tarn in the form of an inelastic vapor or gas, dull, sluggish, faintly discernible, and leaden hued. Shaking off from my spirit what must have been a dream, I scanned more narrowly the real aspect of the building. Its principal feature seemed to be that of an excessive antiquity. The discoloration of the ages had been great. Minute fungi overspread the whole exterior, hanging in a fine tangled webwork from the caves. Yet all this was apart from any extraordinary dilapidation. No portion of the masonry had fallen, and there appeared to be a wild inconsistency between its still perfect adaptation of parts and the utterly porous and evidently decayed conditions of the individual stone. In this there was much that reminded me of the specious totality of old woodwork which had rotted for long years in some neglected vault with no disturbance from the breath of the external air. Beyond this indication of extensive decay, however, the fabric gave little token of instability. Perhaps the eye of a scrutinizing observer might have discovered a barely perceptible fissure, which, extending from the roof of the building in front, made its way down the wall in a zigzag direction until it became lost in the sullen waters of the tarn. So I read you that passage because it's curious. Like Nicole, you mentioned decay. He talks of, but it's not the whole house that's decaying, right? He talks about like the individual parts, like the individual stones seem to be decaying, but the house as a whole, its foundation still seems solid, right? Even though every brick looks like it's decaying, but the foundation is still there. That seems to be what he's saying. Um, it seems pretty evident that this setting is a reflection of this family and some to some extent, right? Yeah, it's remember I told you that word, the uncanny, right? It's a little uncanny that all the bricks are rotten, right? All the stones, but the house, the roof's not caving in, right? The walls still seem solid, so it seems a little awkward, weird then that that's the case. Um,
One thing that I thought about in that passage when it was talking about vapors, it made me think about bogs. An interesting thing about bogs is that any dead thing in bogs is preserved really, really well. It doesn't change the fact that it's dead, but it does kind of slow the decay. I don't know. Do y'all feel like that was intentional, or is that just me?
I didn't know what that was until just now. So
Me either. I'd never heard that before.
you want to explain more, Nicole?
Um, I don't know exactly. Something about the chemical composition of the peat in bogs and the gases that rise from them, like causes anything in them to not decay. Like there are a couple corpses from like, I think it's like 1,000 years ago maybe, that have been almost mummified in a way. And I feel like, how all the bricks are crumbling, but the structure itself still stands. I feel like there's something preserving that kind of decay. Like it doesn't change the fact that that line is dead, but it's slowly decaying. It's not a rapid decay.
Right. I think I know. Yeah, and I think I know what you. I've heard that before too. Right. Certain climates, what will preserve bodies more than others. Right. So in the case of this house, that could be a scientific explanation as far as what's going on. That's something I should say about Poe. He was a very astute reader of science. Right? He plays on all this superstition stuff. He was a very astute reader of science. He knew all the medical trends that were going on. One thing that both of these stories for today do, I should probably mention as well. See if I can find the passage. Both of these stories go into extreme detail describing the looks of these characters. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but like in the 1800s, there was actually a trend of medicine called physiognomy. Physiognomy. And that was a branch of medicine dedicated to trying to figure out something about somebody's character just based off of the way their face is constructed. Excuse me, get ready to sneeze. I held it back. All right. And yeah, based on the way their face is constructed. It's like the way the bones in the face are, the chin, like the eyes. Eyes always are like the window into the soul, right? All these different types of. You could talk about judging someone based off their appearance, right? You could 19th century believe you could do that. You could come up with this is who this person is, just based off their face. Right, so both of the stories for today, Ligeia and this, do this to a great extent. Have you guys ever heard about that before? Medicine based off of facial features and all this?
I have heard about that. I read it's by the same woman that wrote The Handmaid's Tale. It's called Alias Grace. And one of the doctors in that confronted her was going to measure her head because according to some new psychological theory, by the measurements on someone's head, you could see what like mental disorders they had.
Right. Yeah, they definitely did this. It was often this type of medicine was often used in racial ways too, right? They would like these physiognomist scientists, right, would like describe the features, especially of black people, right? And they would oftentimes try to say, oh, they're not as smart as white people because of their skulls or something like that, right? So
wasn't there a stigma that claimed that people that had narrow eyes had a lower IQ? That might have been more modern, but I feel like I've read that somewhere.
I haven't heard that one before. Yeah. It probably was though, like all these different associations with different features, right? It's interesting to say the least. 19th century medicine was pretty wild. This will be something we can talk about with Ligeia too. But in America in the 1800s, from the 1830s up to about the 1860s, like anybody could claim to be a doctor. Anybody could. Like you didn't have to. There were like laws saying that you had to go to school and that you had to be certified by the state and all that. But those laws were repealed during the Andrew Jackson years of the country. He didn't do it himself. Different state legislatures did it. But there was this kind of sentiment in the air that doctors were like snobs. Right? They didn't really care about their patients. They cared about themselves, right, and preserving their profession more than their patients. So that's why a lot of this stuff blew up, right? You had mainline medicine, you had homeopathy, right? Homeopathy is still popular today. Um, you had physiognomy, like I just talked about. You had water hydrotherapy was what it was called, right? But, you had all kinds of different stuff, right? Leech treatments, right? You could go and get almost anything you wanted in 1800s America, right?
The crazy thing to me about that is that while a lot of times they miss the point there was a small part of those like really off the wall things that was accurate. Like the hydrotherapy thing, you know, holders can release can't remember the name of it, like endorphins in your brain or whatever that can help with depression and stuff like that. But then like putting someone in like boiling water is not going to help them.
Right. Yeah, homeopathy still has a lot of like folksy cure treatments and stuff that people still do today as well. Of course, even today, the medical establishment will always be like, no, don't ever listen to those people. They're quacks, right? But they do that because they're preserving their own profession, right? They want to protect their profession from outsiders, right? Which is same thing for lawyers, right? You have to be certified to be a lawyer. You have to be certified to be a nurse, um, a teacher. Teacher, you have to be certified to be a K to 12 teacher. You do not have to be certified to be a college professor, right? Except having a degree. So yeah, interesting thing. I guess I would bring it up because it'll come up especially in Ligeia here in a minute, like the medical treatments that his second wife gets or doesn't get. Yeah, it's curious though because even the house is described in a physiognomy type of way, right? Like he even describes it as the first paragraph, the second paragraph of the story. He describes it as having eye-like windows, right? Have any of you guys ever like walked by a creepy house and thought, "Ooh, those windows look like eyes," right? Yeah. Some horror movies play on that. Um, like the house looks like a face, right? And the eyes upstairs look like
I get more notions of that from cars than I do houses.
from cars.
I'll be driving down the road and I'll see a car and I'll be like, that car looks mean. I bet the person who drives it is mean.
There is a horror movie where the house is the scary creature. Like the house lives and breathes.
That's the Amity.
It was Monster House, wasn't it? I
Uh,
think so.
I can't think of the name of the movie. I remember watching it. I've watched it multiple times. Though the name of the movie is kind of eluding me right now. A lot of names are eluding me. I can't remember any names.
Was it the Amityville horror?
I think.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, Monster House was like an animated film. That's the one where like the house itself is alive.
Yeah. It was an animated film that was. Yeah, but I can't remember the name. It's been like years since I watched it.
Yeah, the most famous movie of this type's called the Amityville horror, right? If any of you guys have seen those Conjuring films, right? Remember at the beginning of the Conjuring 2 when they're in that house, she sees the nun for the first time, right? That's that story of the Amityville horror, right? Good 70s movie, very creepy. I would recommend it. So yeah, I mean, you guys seem to be of the opinion then that all this stuff didn't happen at the end, right? That the narrator had went mad along with Roderick. We haven't heard much from you, Lauren. Do you think that?
Yes, I do believe that. Based off of most of the ways Poe's stories end, I do believe that he went mad at the end, like everybody else in the story.
Right. I should probably mention too this theme of premature burial that's in the story. In the 1800s, this type of thing did happen a lot. If a patient went into a coma, right, they wouldn't have known that it was a coma, right? So oftentimes people were buried in a casket and woke up in the casket. Can you imagine anything more horrifying than that? I
I
can't.
somewhere where they also tied bells to their fingers if they didn't think they were dead, so if they woke up, they could ring the bell.
Yep, that's true. That's true.
That was in The Nun, I believe, something like that. But the only thing that would persuade me to think that they actually did see her was after they laid her in the tomb. They looked on her body for a little bit, and it talked about her still being flushed and not having that like dead look that is described in Ligeia, because he makes it very clear, that woman was dead, and then she slowly gets her look of life and the flush of life back. But with Roderick's sister, she still had that when they buried her, and that's the only thing that kind of makes me question.
Right. Yeah, she didn't have that rigor mortis, right? The stiffness of the joints and all of that. So, of course, leaving it ambiguous adds to the scare factor here, right? But
I think another thing that kind of comes into play for that is I don't remember what was said exactly, but Roderick wants to bury her or wants to put her away really quickly. He's kind of rushed it. Honestly, thinking back on it, I think she might have really come back. I think she might have actually, because he really wanted to rush and put her away and be done with it. And that is kind of what drove him over the edge.
yeah, it's almost like he's trying to bury his shame, even, right, by burying her so quick, right? But it's curious too that they wait like 2 weeks before they actually do bury her, right? Just because the foot there's a footnote in my text that said the reason why they did that was because in the 1800s, oftentimes people would dig up fresh corpses to sell on the black market for dissection purposes. Right, so these young medical students and stuff, they couldn't get a cadaver from a college. Oftentimes they would work on a corpse they got off the black market, right? Pretty wild stuff, right? So he was afraid that she would be dug up like right after she was dead, and somebody would get her corpse and do whatever to it.
With the stories that we've read from Poe so far, there's been a trend of, things coming back from the dead or not really being dead. I know that we're not always supposed to really try to reflect on the author a lot of times, but I feel like that honestly can kind of reflect something that Poe is really ashamed of, or something that he, is trying to keep buried but doesn't really want to keep buried. I don't know. Do you all feel like that?
He was maybe struggling with repressed feelings of his own. Well, it's hard to say without diving too deep into his biography, right? We do know that he dealt with these substance abuse issues. Um, his great love was a cousin too, right? So this theme, it's not as egregious as your own sister, right? Like in the story, right? But it's like maybe he had some weird feelings there, perhaps, right? It's always the danger of bringing the author into the text, right? Just because we don't know what he was thinking, right? Sometimes even an author will say, "This is what I was thinking," right? But still, you don't have to. That doesn't shut down interpretation, right? You don't have to. You don't even have to trust the author, right? As far as what the author said he or she was trying to say. One of the stories we'll read next week is called "The Yellow Wallpaper," right? And there's actually a piece that the author wrote called "Why I Wrote the Yellow Wallpaper." Right, we'll talk about that. I don't know, Ryan, Lauren, do you guys think that we should bring the author in, or do you guys think that something that maybe it's best we not speculate on it?
Well, Poe, he's known for many things. bringing him in, like, he is generally just insane, and it is kind of derivative in all of his stories that he's going further and further into madness, and some of his stories even throw examples of his madness in there. I feel like this is an apparent, especially in the House of Usher, as he both of the people who are alive and well in there, well being physically well, not mentally, and it's based on my assumptions that like all of these are kind of his slowly descent further and further into madness.
Do you think each story maybe represents Poe's own descent into madness? Is that what you're saying here?
Yeah.
Right.
I don't think with everyone you can bring in their biography or whatever you want to, but I think with Poe you can definitely tell, like what Ryan said, that in each story he's just saying something in a different way about his own madness just getting worse and worse and worse.
So
I agree. And I think that, even though it's interesting, I think that Poe's a hard person to kind of bring into his stories because you can't just do it with one. You have to look at all of them. And that's really time consuming.
right. Yeah, he was an author of wide breadth too. He didn't just that's something else I should probably mention. He didn't just write horror stories. He was also an innovator of the detective story as well. He was one of the first pioneers of that genre. We think about Arthur Conan Doyle and the Sherlock Holmes stories, right? But Poe is right there with him as far as innovating that genre too. So fun fact for you. I don't know if any of you guys knew that he wrote a lot of those types of stories too, but he did. The Purloined Letter is his most famous one in that genre. He only wrote one novel though. He did not experiment with the longer prose form much. He always stuck for the most part, stuck to short stories. Of course, that's something else too that I should probably mention. Americans were the ones who innovated the short story. Right? A lot of these stories we're reading are the earliest, really good ones, right? In that genre. So until about 1800 or so, it was mostly just poetry and drama. In the 1700s, the novel was invented by the French and British, right? And in the 1800s, that's when the short stories came along. You can thank America for innovating that genre, not the Brits. That, that's why in our other class, Nicole, we're mostly reading just poetry and drama, right? It's because there really wasn't any prose like we have here. Well, let's talk about Ligeia. Let's figure out what's going on here. Um, Again, one of you all summarize the plot for me. What happens in Ligeia?
In Ligeia, he marries this woman that he spends like 3 pages describing. And then she ends up getting sick, and not 2 months later, he marries another woman.
Right.
And then she gets sick also, and as she's dying, he starts to see his other wife in her face instead of the second wife.
Exactly. Right. You described it. You described it in a nutshell. Exactly what happens. Um, so yeah, the narrator the narrator in this story is much different than Usher. Right? Usher, we talked about how it's very tame narrator compared to normal. This story, the narrator is very, I don't know what word, But we say obsessive compulsive here, maybe, right? He seems very obsessive compulsive and talking about Ligeia, especially.
You can tell in his very, very extent examination and explanations of their appearance that he is very obsessed.
I agree. And I think also just in the execution of the writing, his uses of dashes and his punctuation, it's almost like he was so enthralled with this woman that he couldn't hold a single train of thought. It's like he would jump around and he couldn't quite sum it up correctly when he would try to describe the feeling that he would get from seeing her.
Yeah, there are lots of, you're right, there are lots of dashes, right, in these descriptions. We talked about dashes a little bit the other day and how it kind of shows the narrator's fragmented mind oftentimes, right? Yeah, the physiognomy thing definitely comes into play in this story, right? Just because, like Ryan just said, or was I think it was Ryan who just said it. Might have been Warren, but like the very long 2 or 3 pages of detail what we get, right, is significant. But the third paragraph in, I will read this because this is where we get the description of her eyes, right? It says, for our eyes, we have no models in the remotely antique. Might have been, too, that in those days of my beloved lay the secret to which Lord Verulam alludes. They were, I must believe, far larger than the ordinary eyes of our race. They were even far fuller than the fullest of the gazelle eyes of the tribe of the valley of Norjahad. It says that that's an Asian race. It says, yet it was only at intervals and moments of intense excitement that the peculiarity became more than slightly noticeable in Ligeia. And at such moments was her beauty, and my heated fancy thus had appeared perhaps the beauty of beings either above or apart from the earth, the beauty of the fabulous houri of the Turk. The collar of the orbs was the most brilliant black, and far over them hung jetty lashes of great length. The brows, slightly irregular in outline, had the same line. The strangeness, however, which I have found in the eyes of my Ligeia, was of a nature distinct from the formation or the color or the brilliancy of the feature, and must, after all, be referred to the expression. A word of no meaning, behind whose vast latitude of mere sound we entrench our ignorance of so much of the spiritual expression in the eyes of Ligeia. How for long hours have I pondered upon it? How have I, through the whole of a midsummer night, struggled to fathom it? What was it, that something more profound in the well of Democritus, which lay far within the pupils of my beloved? What was it? I was possessed with a passion to discover. Those eyes, those large, those shining, those divine orbs. They became to me twin stars of Leda, and I to them devoutest of astrologers. Not for a moment was the unfathomable meaning of their glance, by day or by night, absent from my soul. Ladies, if you had somebody describe you this way, would you be creeped out or would you be flattered? I guess that's the question. That's the question to ask here.
For me, it depends on if the feeling is reciprocated. If it's just like, if it's a coworker, nah.
No.
But if it's my fiance, yeah, I'd be pretty happy.
Right.
If it was someone I've been around for a really long time, yes, I think it'd be okay. But if I just met the dude and he was talking about me like this, I think he was a creep.
Right. Just after the first date, he says that your eyes make him the most devout of astrologers, right? That you probably wouldn't get a second date, right? Yeah, it's funny. It's funny stuff, right? But it is very flattering, right? The description of her. Her beauty in this case doesn't seem to be beauty in the traditional sense, right? She seems like she has, her eyes are so big on her face that it doesn't really blend in with the rest of her face, it seems. Right? That seems to be the description we're getting of her.
Hmm. I don't know. I found that interesting when he called her unconventional, because I'm sure that back then it was very unconventional, because, you know, he described her having dark hair, dark eyes, dark lashes. And I feel like for a really, really long time, especially like the 1900s, you know, fair, blonde, blue eyes, that was the thing that people liked. So I think today she wouldn't really be unconventional. I think if we actually, the way that she was, the way that I view her as she was described, I wouldn't think that she was unconventional. And, you know, one thing that also got me about her eyes, he said that it was only noticeable when she was, I think, like in some kind of excitement or some kind of great emotion.
Right. Yeah, I think he talks about, especially when she starts talking about knowledge and how wise she is and all this stuff. He definitely talks about her eyes then as well. Um, yeah, I'm looking at another passage here where he talks about how smart she is. Um, she's his guide into the spiritual, right? It's like she's the chick that's into astrology, right? That's Ligeia, right? He was enraptured by it. So yeah, we do find out in the narrator of the story openly admits it, just like with the black cat with alcohol, that he's under the influence of opium. Right? We do find that out. He admits it. So that establishes this unreliable narrator trend that we've had. So yeah, the further the story goes on, his second wife gets sick. He talks about how he even like hates her, right, because she's not Ligeia, right? Which she seems almost like the second wife seems almost like a victim in the story, right? Because did you guys get the sense that he might have murdered her? Did you get the sense here?
I did. What really sealed the deal for me was when he was talking about the wine that I think the doctor prescribed her or whatever, you know, noticing a few drops of red liquid put into it. I feel like either the narrator is being untruthful, or subconsciously the narrator tricked themselves into not remembering, or just chose to leave the detail out that their hand was where those drops came from, or something that was in their hand.
Right. Yeah, I remember what you're talking about. Like he even says he didn't really know if it was what that was, the reddish thing that appeared in her glass. Right. It could have been poison. Right. Yeah, he's under such an opium dream, right? That he didn't know himself. But like was summed up, we find out that at the end, the body just dies over and over through the night. Right, she goes into rigor mortis, then she loosens up and gasps for breath again, and then loosens up. Right, so at the end, he sees the eyes of Ligeia, right, within her. All right, so this is one of his craziest stories, I think. This one's pretty out there as far as that goes. Um, I don't know. What you guys make of this one? Just in general. Did you? And I think you read it before in high school.
Man, he was abusing drugs and being overly obsessed with his wife and or lover. Don't know if it was a wife or not. Didn't really catch that part. But pretty sure him taking opium, like he admitted in the story, I mean, he could actually not be mad, but while he was high, let's say, he was definitely seeing things. Because if a body goes into rigor mortis, it's dead. It's not going to move again.
Mm.
I think he was definitely seeing things that other people definitely would not have seen.
I agree. And one thing that I found really interesting was that when Ligeia was dying, it talked about her professing her love to him. And in her last moments, how angry he was that it was only at her death that she was doing that. And I don't know. I kind of got the feeling that the narrator wasn't being totally true in that, because me, if my husband was like an opium user and did that constantly, I don't think that I would be professing great feelings of love at the end of my life. If that is the life that I had known, I think that it would have been hate and anger.
I'll offer you guys this question. Do you guys all know the red herring fallacy, right? Do you guys think that this opium thing's just a red herring that Poe's throwing in here just to distract you from what might be happening? Is it a red herring? Do you think?
I think that's entirely possible, but I couldn't really tell you if it is or not. It's kind of out there. It is a plausible idea, though.
I agree. I think it's very possible, but to me, like, I don't know a whole lot about opium. Was it like a psychedelic?
Oh yeah, it was the first like really um, addictive drug. Like in
One thing,
the 18
uh-huh.
just a little history lesson for you. In the 1800s, the British Empire was the first really big drug lords, right? They had the opium trade all over the world, and they brought down the China with it, right? Because they got the Chinese so addicted to opium that they were able to almost colonize them. Right? It wasn't until the 20th century that China became a world power again because the British crippled them with drugs. So that's the fun little fact for you.
Yeah, but I'm not sure if the opium was red herring or not, because when I was thinking about it, I know that like you get visuals, like sometimes you can visually hallucinate when you're on drugs and stuff. And I thought, well, if he's thinking that her eyes are bigger than they really are, could that be a hallucination? That's what I thought.
Right. Yeah, it's certainly possible. I know that there's a lot of modern drugs that are opiates, right? That come from opium. I don't know too much about it, but like they did have these fever dreams and things like this, right? It was a hallucinogenic drug for sure. There's a great poem called, well, um, we just talked about Citizen Kane in our other class, but the poem Kubla Khan, um, written by Coleridge, that's what he named Xanadu after in the movie, right? That poem was supposedly written in this great fever dream of opium, which is another fun fact for you. Yeah, I've always been skeptical. You guys seem like it's a way to distrust the narrator. I've always been skeptical. I think Poe's just screwing with us here, right? I think, yeah, that's always been my. I don't even really have a good explanation for why. I just have a feeling he's trolling us here, right? By bringing up opium.
One thing I will say, I don't think I really don't even think that Poe was in love with Ligeia. I think he was in love with the way that she made him feel. That's one thing that I got, because he could never really capture and describe the way that, her eyes made him feel, the way that she made him feel. He would just go off in tangents, and then it would be kind of on to something else. And I think he used really beautiful, like, wording for it and really nice symbolism. But to me, it just didn't feel like he was really in love with her.
Right. Was he in love with love and not her, you think?
That's what I think.
Yeah, again, the second wife is the victim here, right? You know, it seemed like it was a marriage of money and convenience, not a marriage of love, right? Which yeah, she quickly becomes victim to.
Do you think that the setting, like, didn't he bought an old monastery after Ligeia passed away, didn't he?
Yep, yep. It's this dreary town on the Rhine. So the Rhine is Germany, right? So I think he's in this German um, town. So yeah, this again. I'm glad you brought that up. Setting is important here, right? Because again, it is this like how fall a house of Usher. It's this old, decrepit, like monastery type of place. He even says money's never been an obstacle in my life in the story, right? But the guy who write the narrator's rich, whoever the narrator is.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of parallels. Well, some parallels and some differences between the fall of House Usher and Ligeia as far as the setting went, especially with the monastery. Because to me, I felt like there was a kind of beauty in the dilapidation of that monastery. I felt like he got a little bit of comfort from it. And I don't know, do you all feel that way?
The narrator of Ligeia, you mean, or right?
Yeah, I feel like the narrator is the one that got the comfort from it, and I feel like his second wife was just kind of drug along for the ride.
Right? It brings up these sensations of like I don't know, like these old. This is something we again, and as Americans, it's hard for us to relate to, right? Because we don't really have these old 500 or 600 year buildings, these big old castles and stuff, like lingering around. Right? Nowhere in America do we have that. So, but it does bring up these old feelings of. He talks about metaphysics a lot, right? You know, spirituality and things like these old buildings invoke a lot of connection to that type of thing. Yeah. Have any of you ever been to Europe on a vacation or anything?
I have.
You have? Where'd
I
you
was gonna. I went to Scotland, England, and France, and we visited. We got to visit Shakespeare's cottage, and we visited Notre Dame before it burned, and we visited a lot of really, really beautiful, interesting places. And I was going to mention just the feeling that you got from those places, the history. Like we in Scotland, we went to, I think it was not the royal seat now, but the old royal seat. And they walked us into this room and they were like, this is where Mary, Queen of Scots was born. And so was born. And I was like, wow. It's just a very otherworldly feeling. It honestly makes you feel like you're back in time.
right? Yeah, I can imagine going to Scotland would invoke that feeling, right? Just because of all the old estates and things that they have up through there.
I actually had a very interesting experience in Scotland. We went to the dungeon in that same castle, and I do not know what it was, but I just got this overwhelming feeling of absolute dread and terror, and I almost passed out. Within 2 minutes of being in there, I was so sick to my stomach that I felt like I was going to pass out and just be gone.
Yeah, I've still never been. I will go. I will go one of these days. Rome is where I most want to go over there. I'm such a Roman history nerd.
Scotland was wonderful. We saw there was some kind of convention going on. And there are these tiny little alleyways that you never even notice until you're right in there, like right in the doorway to them or right at their entrance. And we were just walking down the King's Mall, and then 20 Gandalfs just started running out of one and just started babbling away. And I was like, huh?
They're like, you shall not pass. All right. All right, guys. Well, I think that's enough for today. That was fun, though. Two really good stories here. very different from what we read the other day. So you got a little more flavor from Poe, which you didn't get before. That's probably enough as far as you get the ideas of what Poe was doing as a horror writer, right? So you're going to get a much different experience reading Hawthorne. I think you'll find he's Hawthorne's a little more dry than Poe, but his stories are still really good. You guys might know him from the Scarlet Letter. He wrote the Scarlet Letter. That's his most famous novel that he wrote. He was also a very prominent short story writer. So I said Rappaccini's Daughter and Minister's Black Veil. Those will be the two stories I give you of his. The themes are very different than what we've been doing here too. All right, so see some of you in just a few. We'll see you next time, Lauren. Take care.